Welcome to our conversation with Bill Lee. Bill has graciously agreed to come talk to us about the death, the murder really, of George Floyd and its aftermath. I'll just introduce him real quick. Bill was a longtime pastor at Loudon Avenue Christian Church. He's been a wonderful leader for that church and also in our community. If I had time, which I'm not going to take because you've seen slides telling more about Bill, I could go into great detail about all the wonderful things he has done at the church and in the community in regards to health care. I do need to say that he's been a great friend of our congregation, and he's been a personal friend as well, a strong support and colleague of mine and the other ministers at this church as long as I have been here, and I'm so grateful. Before I get to the conversation, I want to thank Andrea Boone, who is the producer for this program, and Doug Settles, who is handling the sound. Reverend Elizabeth Link is also here. You won't see her, but you will hear her voice. She will ask questions as well, and she will be monitoring the comments section of this live feed. We had a lot of questions submitted. I have a lot of questions. Elizabeth has questions. We can't get to them all. We've tried to summarize them as well as possible. We've changed protocol a bit. We used to say this question has come from so-and-so, but this is a very difficult issue, and some folks have asked questions, but they don't want to come across as silly or look foolish in asking them. And there was some concern about that for whether it was justified or not. So we're not going to mention names because we feel like questions that people have need to be asked, and we just need to talk to each other, and we need to listen to each other. Bill, I'll start, but welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. The image, Bill, that nobody can get out of their minds is the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of watching a white officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, who was subdued by other officers, with other officers watching, and the calculated coldness of it, repositioning his knee so as to more effectively subdue the airflow. And that was galvanizing, obviously, for the community, but it's extremely upsetting to watch. And we have to talk about this, and it's difficult, but I'm so grateful that you've come to help us to deal with this. But that image, we have to start with that. That image is what's hard to get past and get out of our hearts and minds, and maybe has started a conversation for whatever tragic reasons that we really need to have. Help us understand why the killings of George Floyd has inspired such a reaction, inspired protests not only in Minneapolis, but all across the country and now all across the world.
Well, George, I think the first thing we have to look at, that moment comes at a point of what I call a cumulative effect. We had just tried to wrap our heads around Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed 2 months, and nothing had been done, so we heard that. Then Deonna Taylor in Louisville shot 8 times, and that still is crazy. We hadn't gotten over Trayvon Martin. We hadn't gotten over Michael Brown in Missouri. So this was cumulative. So when you see the picture of George Floyd, you see all of that coming together. So let me see if I can help us see this. Here's a black man with a white officer with his knee on his neck, and there are other officers watching. From what we see, the man is subdued. He's not going away, so there's no necessity. Except for when you look at it as a black person, you see again abuse of power, but also a case where we're convinced, at least I'm convinced, that persons did not see George Floyd as being a human. 8 minutes and 46 seconds on a man's neck. At 4:46, he said he couldn't breathe. At 5:23, they took his pulse. None. The officer Shaven is absolutely at ease. There is no sense of trouble with him at all. It's like this, I've done this before. So you're looking at that.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of all of the mothers of black churches, and they're looking at this because they heard Floyd say, "Mama." And I will guarantee you that every woman I know that goes to a black church in particular said he's calling for his mother. At least give him some relief. That's where we come from. And then I can't breathe. But no relief. So when we're looking at this, we're saying that he is less than an animal. He is not human. The only way to do that is to treat him as a non-existent thing. To make it worse for some of us looking at that, it's almost a flashback to a song sung by Billie Holiday, "Strange Fruit." I want to read it. I tried to put it to memory, but too many things are going on. But Billie Holiday sung this: "Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here's strange and bitter fruit." And for me, I think those who've been around saw strange fruit again. Because with strange fruit, whenever there was a hanging in the communities of the South, this was entertainment. So the families came. They brought their children to watch a black person hang. And what I saw, were people almost being entertained, especially other officers watching. The one did say, can we turn him over? But that's what I think, with the cumulative effect of all the others and seeing that, I hear black mothers, I hear black fathers, because I'm one of them, because when I kept looking, that could have been my son. Mm-hmm. And I heard the collective cry of black people saying, "Hell no. Hell no. No more." And I think that's where we are now. I think the cry is, "Hell no. No more of this." I think that's part of what was seen with George Floyd's death, reminiscent of strange fruit.
Yeah. I think one thing that we need to realize is that the outrage was different depending on which community was looking at it. We're not all outraged in the same way. I think for white people, it was a shocker. How could this happen? And the shock, am I right? That was more same old from your perspective, rather than the shock and how could this be allowed to have happened? Am I right?
Right. The advent of the camera phone may be the saving grace for a lot of black males. But even with that, here's the frightening thing. He knew he was being filmed and did not relent.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Well, I do. If there is no human, if there's no person here.
Yeah.
There's a young woman out in Whitefish, Montana. Francine is the last name. I read this other night. She said her father told her this. She was being stared down by a white male, 51 years old, looked like about 6'4". She's a petite little person, biracial. And she stared him down. And they asked her, "Why did you do that?" She said, "My father told me as a little child, no matter who tries to give you fear, no matter what tries to give you fear, you look them in the eye so they'll know that you are human." And I'm thinking, what parent has to tell their child,
right,
you got to convince folk that you are human? And I want to clearly state that I think the state of America, for a lot of black people, but especially our black males, we question whether folk believe that we're human.
I hear that. this came from a couple of sources. If memory serves, Black Lives Matter was first a hashtag, and then a rallying cry, and then the formal name of a movement. Of course, it all began after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. Now, since then, some have responded, well, blue lives matter and all lives matter. And questions have been submitted. One person, inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of a day coming when we'll be judged by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin, asked why the slogan, All Lives Matter, is so wrong. Can you help us understand why Black Lives Matter has become such an important rallying cry, and why some within its movement want or need so much to hear those who are white to acknowledge that and say it as well?
Well, George, the quote concerning King in 1963, that we be judged by the content of our character rather than by the color of our skin, has not realized. We are nowhere near that. You got to get close enough to me to know anything about the character of my content or the content of my character. And so what we're seeing, the reason why we are yelling Black Lives Matter, is because we see that Black lives don't matter. Now, for those who want to throw in blue lives matter, all lives matter, we're not arguing that. I think people don't hear us. Yes, blue lives matter. Policemen matter. White people matter. But in this context, in this culture, what I'm seeing, what we're seeing, at the rate that we are being killed, there is some question among us whether indeed we matter. So the hashtag is simply to say to America, wake up, take a look, pay attention. At the rate we are being killed, we question whether indeed Black lives matter. I'm always troubled when somebody always wants to throw something else in when we're the ones that's being pained. How many white males have we seen killed? How many white females have we seen police break into their apartments and shoot like that? We haven't seen it. So we don't, it's a given, at least for me, that white lives matter. It's a given that blue lives matter. It's not a given that Black lives matter. Now, let me press this. George Floyd said something else. He said, I can't breathe. A lot of us who are talking about Black Lives Matter, we're having breathing problems, and our breathing problem did not start on Memorial Day. When you live in a country that refuses to have universal health care, we can't breathe. When you live in a country, when you get the closest thing to universal health care in Affordable Care Act, but it is denigrated by being called the Obamacare, and then being stripped, we can't breathe. When you work at McDonald's, Burger King, and Hardee's, and you have no leave, your child gets sick at school, there's no sick child care. If you leave work and go take care of your child, the chance the job's not going to be back when you go back, you can't breathe. And we were having a hard time breathing. And so we saw with George Floyd not being able to breathe, a collective sense for a lot of Black people, we're having a hard time breathing in America. Now, people look at me and say, well, Reverend Lee, that can't be you. Oh, yes, it's me. I've had to work overtime in the last few weeks just to keep myself cool. Because I'm going to tell you, I really want to go off and go crazy, but then nobody's going to hear anything that I have to say if I do that. Yes, Black lives matter. It doesn't mean that other lives don't, but we're trying to say, please pay attention to what's going on in society right now.
Thank you. Thank you. The classic symbol of the law is that of a woman holding scales with her eyes covered. And the idea behind that symbol is a powerful one, that she does not see class, race, income, or privilege, but that everyone who comes before her is going to be treated equally. That all are innocent until proven guilty, and that all are treated equally by the law, whether it's on the streets or in the courtroom or in sentencing. But is not the message of these protests that inequality and bias is baked into the law itself, baked into that the woman whose eyes are covered, so that it's not so impartial.
Yeah, that symbol needs to be changed. I don't know who came up with that symbol. There is no such thing as being unbiased. What we're looking for is justice, not for folk. You can be unbiased and still be a person of justice. The late Richard Pryor, in one of his albums, I forget which one, he said, "I'll tell you what justice is. Go to the courtroom and that's what you'll see, just us black people." There's no such thing as not being biased. Even when I read the scriptures, especially as I walk through the Old Testament prophets and I'm looking and hearing the voice of God, God has always, in my mind, as I struggle through scripture, has been a God on the side of the marginalized, those who are beaten, the downtrodden. So then say God is biased. But if God is biased, he is also just. Mm-hmm. And so if I would use any scales, I want a God who somehow balances the scales of life. There's a thing called a counterweight. I'm from the country. We had a well in our backyard, and we had a bucket, a galvanized bucket that you would let down and then get a bucket of water and pour it into the container, take it back in the house. But if the bucket didn't have a counterweight on it, sometimes a little 10-pound weight, which would force the bucket to dip, then you couldn't get water. And I'm glad I've got a God who gets on my side of the bucket, because otherwise I would be indeed parched and will never get a drink. But God dips for us. And that's the hope for black people. We got a God who counterweights. There is no such thing as being unbiased. But we do want justice. And I think you can be a lot of things, but you can also be just. Now, let me just, when I was in school, we used to get a ruler, 12-inch ruler, and this is before folk got crazy about church and state, and on it was the golden rule. Do unto others as you'll have them do unto you. That's what's on the rulers in my school. That's what we're looking for, not a woman with a blindfold. I'm looking for people who will actually see me as a human being, wanting the same thing that George wants, the same thing that Elizabeth wants, the same thing that everybody in America wants. I don't want an American nightmare that James Cone talked about. I would like to be part of the American dream. But the only way that's going to happen is I got to be treated with justice. A picture. And I don't want to spend all day, but a picture. So someone sent me this piece, Colin Kaepernick kneeling, the police officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck. And they asked the person, white person, which picture bothers you the most? Mm-hmm. And the person hesitated, and to this moment has yet to answer the question. The fact that you have to hesitate tells me that you don't understand what justice is and what being balanced and treating people with respect. Colin Kaepernick tried to help us. We missed that and made it about flag. And God knows there's nobody more patriotic than me, but when the flag is more important than a human life, enough said.
Yeah, we talk about things that are baked into the system. It would be nice from my own perspective if, as intended, that grace and compassion was baked into the system of law. And it is, but that's a symbol of something that is not equal for a reason that you are looking out for, and you're bending toward those in need as part of the common good of everybody.
True. But since we're in Second Presbyterian Church, I can talk church, right?
Sure.
Okay. If we who claim our faith, and I'm one who claims Jesus as my Christ, that does not exclude any of my Muslim brothers, Jewish, it's just what I claim. But let's just say we claim God, we claim a higher being. I don't think there is a religion I know that does not have love at its center. And I just think if we who claim faith would simply do what we're supposed to do, we could radically change this world. Now, some folks, Bill, you're so simplistic. Well, I still believe in the power of love. I really do. I believe in the power of love. I believe that Martin Luther King Jr. had it right, but he didn't get that from Gandhi. He got that from Jesus. Love your neighbor as yourself. I just think that it's high time for those of us in this realm, the thing that's called church and synagogue, it's time for us to stop talking about what it is to be and just be. Now, does it cost you anything? I would hate for Second Pres to fire you if you got up this Sunday and said, you know, Bill Lee has stirred me. I got to preach this, let justice roll down. Because the problem is you do too many other wonderful things. I would hate for you to get in trouble. I may change by the end of this and say, George, get in trouble. But I just think the church has to do a better job. The religious folk have to do a better job than just rhetoric. I think it's high time for us to do some stuff.
I'm going to go to Elizabeth, but I did say a line in my last sermon that if you're going to, the trouble you can get into by following Jesus, what better reason is there to get in trouble?
I'm with that.
Elizabeth.
Sure. The next question we have is really a two-part question, and then we have an online question that's related. So if it's okay, I might, after you answer these, follow up with the related question. How would you describe race relations in Roanoke today? And share with us about the experience of African Americans, the experience they have with the police. Why are police perceived differently within the black community?
Okay, your first question, race relations in Roanoke, I would deem to be polite. I can't get into better than that. We are polite about race stuff in Roanoke. There's no major conversation until there's some crisis. Crisis blows over. Nothing else said until next crisis. I think that Brenda Hale stays on top of a lot of stuff with NAACP. I think SALC does a good job in trying to keep us honest. But by and large, in Roanoke Valley, we are polite. Let me push this politeness. There is no ecumenical, interracial ministers gathering in the Roanoke Valley. And I keep asking myself, I know when we stopped, I was president of the Roanoke Valley Ministers Conference when we shut down because no one would come. And I'm trying to remember, was it when we started talking the race issue that folk just didn't want to get engaged in that and say, you know, I'm not coming to meetings, we're going to talk about that. So Roanoke, at best I can tell you, is polite. You won't, even, I watched the protests, I listened, especially Saturday. Most of the conversation was polite talk. Yeah, polite is best I can do with that. The second question, relation of African Americans with police in Roanoke community. Let me say first that there is no such thing as an African American community in Roanoke. There are African American communities. For anyone to think that you can go into one section, deal with a few black people, and you've talked to black people in Roanoke, then again we have failed. If you watch the marches, you will see probably, from what I've seen, at least 5 or 6 black Roanokes moving. So I don't think I can do that. What I can tell you from my own personal experience over the years is that I found out if you spend time with the police department, you can have a great talking relationship. My years go back to the start of the neighborhood partnership that was anchored at Loudon Christian Church. All the meetings were held there. Got to get to know the police department. In those days, we had a police chief that was rather, it was a lot of problems for black people. I remember the Reverend Carl Tinsley, at that time president of NAACP, a constant battle. I think it was David Hooper. But by the time we got to Joe Gaskins, I remember spending a lot of time with Chief Gaskins. Before community policing, we had that going on in our neighborhood. So personally, I have to say that I have not had those issues, but I cannot speak for the other layers of Roanoke. There are those who probably will give you a total different spin than what I'm giving now.
Great. Well, this next question is tangentially related, and it came up online just a moment ago. This viewer, would like to know what your thoughts are on the demands to defund police departments. We're hearing that in lots of rallies around the country.
Yeah. So this is what we do when things get hot. We have a tendency to go from one pole to the other, one end to the other. I am totally against defunding police departments. We need police departments. What we need in those police departments is indeed that persons are trained well, that sensitivity training, all the stuff they need to be great policemen is what we need. Now, I think it's on Obama.Foundation website. There are 8 steps where you can, I think the guy's name is McKeeson, says that if police department would do this immediately, we can reduce the deaths by 72%, and one is to eliminate the chokehold. And so I think 10 states have already done that. Holding policemen who are watching accountable, that they need to be taught that you can intervene. De-escalation through conversation, this really still works, you know?
Right.
It really still works. So I think for me to defund would not be wise because we've gone to a total another extreme. I think that we need to sit down. I don't know why we stopped being able to sit down and have civil discourse and come out of the room with something that we can work with. So that's where I am, to defund simply states that now we got a free fall. I don't think we're mature enough. I know I'm not. I'm not mature enough not to have somebody to keep me in check. I'm not mature enough not to have somebody keep me in check. Now maybe y'all are, whoever that person was in a different place, but no, defunding will not work for me.
Thank you. There's a lot of literature out there about the history of the police force, and then policing has been used in the past to kind of be to maintain an order and to watch the guard, so to speak. Policing can be a culture, and in some places I think the culture is a lot healthier than other places. In some places it kind of has a legacy, and where again the bias is kind of part of the culture. And so I think I've tried to listen to those who say that how difficult it is to train their children to have to go through extra measures so that when they're pulled, it doesn't escalate, where the responsibility is laid on the driver rather than on the policeman to make that happen. And I've tried to listen to that.
George, I have a son. I have a young man who I call my grandson. Not just called, he is literally for me and my wife, our grandchild. My daughter and son-in-law raised him from 11 years old till this day. The day we gave him the keys to the car, I both rejoiced and cried.
Wow.
He's 18 years old, graduated from William Fleming with honors, has a scholarship to go to Avery University to play football, but also to keep his brain going. Every day, Saquon, if you stop, my son is 41. And I breathe a sigh of relief each evening when we talk that he's in the house. It's not...
I have 3 drivers. I never have that feeling when it comes to...
I was coming from Detroit, it was 4 of us had gone up for a Lions football game, and I got to West Virginia. And this is nothing against West Virginia. So I want any West Virginia viewers, this is nothing against you. But I had broken the law and didn't know it. I saw the state trooper behind me, and when he got to my car, we had all said, we went through the whole process because he was so upset with me for having done a vehicle violation of which I didn't know. I just didn't know. My ignorance, can't get away with it. It's in the book. I know now because I paid for it. But watching him and the way he was shaking and his anger, I said, oh, man.
Oh, goodness.
And I put on my best Reverend Lee voice and said, sir, I apologize. I was not aware that not getting over when you have stopped someone was a violation. I didn't slow down to sufficient speed. I was wrong. But I'm going to tell you, I was not at all a happy camper as he came to my, and especially when they popped that button off their gun holster, and I'm thinking, it's ain't necessary, I'm a harmless person, but that's the reality of life. Yeah. I want to show you how this right now is. I'm going to be honest with you. So the signal light in one of my cars was not working. So I told Dana, I said, I got to go down to Walters to have him put the signal light in. And she said, well, why don't you wait there? I said, oh, no. If I get stopped right now because of this signal light and everybody's edgy, I don't need no issues about no signal light. That's how it is. I'm just going to be honest with you. As a black man, so this week I've gone to the garage twice to make sure all of my signal lights, everything working, because I just don't want the issue. Now, I'm not suggesting the Roanoke City Police are going to come and harass me. I just don't want to put myself in a position where I got to be dealing with anybody right now. Because right now I am a little raw, and I'm a great deal angry. I am quite angry right now, and I don't need to be in a situation where I do something silly.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
I'm going to get back to language. I think many people have forgotten that words matter. I'm a crafter of words. Words are my trade. And what is said and how it is said and when it is said, for me, has mattered a great deal because I know that words can really harm. Media, politicians, preachers, and folks on social media have now for years fueled highly polarized, us versus them, black and white, pun intended, debates, often with racial overtones, as if there's no real damage done because it's achieving something in terms of whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. But now I'm noticing that so many who have participated in these kind of verbal attacks are unnerved themselves by some of what they're hearing, and they're frightened. Do you have any reaction to that? I guess that's not a question, but that one comes from me. But do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, let me, I'm trying to think on two sides of this. I think that white America needs to be very careful not to get overly sensitive to trying to get everything right.
That is a nervousness out there in the white community.
Yeah. You're not going to get everything right. There are, because we don't talk enough to each other, we don't get to know each other well enough, some stuff will come out of our mouths that just, it jack a black person up. It's just, then on the other hand, I say to black people, I know this is a stressful time for everybody. God knows. So you try to be a little more sensitive and patient and say, because I think you have to say it. That really is offensive. But you can't pick up everything, because otherwise we won't be able to even breathe right now. So I think words do matter. So let me show you how these words can really get crazy. Insurrection Act of 1807. How many folk knew what Insurrection Act 1807 was 4 months ago?
You're right.
Why would that excite people, especially if you're black? the word insurrection alone, because we all come out of Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, the early insurrectionist black preachers who led insurrectionists during slavery. John Brown in Charlestown, West Virginia. So Insurrection Act 1807, that becomes a phrase that all of a sudden says, okay, man, this is racist stuff. Why would you even raise that? And again, I'm not here to inflame people, but when you have a president who is using all of the classic language that's divisive, it makes it very difficult for folk out here trying to do a little bit better. I'm just saying to all of us, let's watch our mouths, let's catch our ears, do the best we can, but somebody need to mute or take away the Twitter ability of our president, because he is not helping diffuse the madness that's starting to happen. Now, I believe in the trickle-down theory. I really do. If it keeps going, if it keeps happening from Pennsylvania Avenue, it's going to happen on Jefferson Street in Roanoke, because persons are going to begin to think, oh, this is the norm. We can't have it. We can't have it. People of goodwill have to work at this. Otherwise, we're going to be in tough shape. I don't want to scare anybody. Maybe I do. I'm amazed that we have not had a bloodbath in America before now. But if we aren't careful, Martin Luther King Jr. said it over and over again, the time is now. That was 68. I'm not sure if folks are going to take much more. I really don't. Now, do I want to go against the United States armed forces in the streets? I'm not insane. But do I feel like it right now? Yep. Yeah. I'm just that angry. Yeah. That may even come near answering your question, George, but that's the best shot at it.
Well, thank you. Have any guidance for, I think you said to me over the phone a couple of days ago that one strategy is very simple. It's building relationships. That unless we hear each other, really understand where each other's coming from, even when we disagree, we surrender to a situation where we oppose each other without hearing each other, without understanding each other. What guidance would you have for us to have the kind of conversations that we need to have? Knowing, by the way, it's very difficult even to be in a room where there are people of different races that are sharing the same living room sometimes to have those conversations. Any guidance you have to offer us?
The same guidance. I'm glad you reminded me, because you called me. It was refreshing. It was healing. We've been friends, and I don't say that lightly. We have been friends for years. If you had not called me, I would have probably had a little issue. If I'd had to call you, say, hey, George, you know what's going on in the world? But you did. You called me, and we ended up in a 45-minute conversation about what's going on. But you could not have called me if we had not built a relationship. Right. Where you said and you said it up front, you said you was hesitant given all that's going on. But because we built a relationship, yes, we can talk. I still believe in that. I just think that we've got to work. I'm not going to give up on white America. I'm not. I can't afford to, because we're not going to change this world just with one race of people. I cannot afford to do that. I will call you into a responsibility and accountability and fight for a just world. I will always do that. But we can't give up on each other. We've got to work at this. And so because you have relationships, you can actually still have conversations. I have an email I still need to respond to. Emily Fisher, who works for our pension fund, she contacted me. She said, with tears, I struggle, but I needed to let you know that I love you and I care about you. I think all of us need that refreshing. Otherwise, I don't want to go back where we used to be. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back there. That makes me feel worse than now. I don't want to go back there.
Yep.
Yes, this question just came in online, actually from Loudon Avenue. And This viewer asks, it's related to what you're just discussing, so that's why I'm asking it now. What is your view on people who do not believe they're racist, but they do have a bias against people of the white race or against people of the black race? Is there a difference in, I'm imagining he's asking the question is there a difference between people who are racist and people who don't believe they are and yet do have these biases?
So what is a racist? And what is racism? And my response to that question is this. I want to get people in a room and let us together come to a common definition of what that is. Because a lot of people are throwing this language around. I can tell you from all of my theological studies that racism at its worst is when there is a group of people who deem themselves to be superior to another. But I think that will scare most of my white friends because they've not deemed themselves to be white supremacists. So I'm not a white supremacist, Bill, so can I be a racist and not be a white supremacist? I think we've got to have this conversation. It's just a little too complicated. For me to simply say, every white person is not a racist, but I know some racist white people. I'm going to tell you that. I know full well there are people who will never make me equal to George Anderson. I don't care what I've done in life. I don't care what I do in life. I'm going to always be colored. I said in honor of my father because my father never got past colored. He said that when they said we was black, he never got to be Negro. He just stayed at colored. He said, I just can't go no further. I said, okay, Pops, I want to honor you. But I'm just saying clearly, we're going to have to sit down. I can go online and Google and give you the classic definition of racist. That's not going to help us where we are now. We're going to have to do some self-analysis. We're going to have to sit together in these rooms and say, okay, that's racism. Because even with that, folks don't understand the difference between systemic and institutional. Individually, you may love me there, but you may vote for legislation that killed me. So that's a lot of work there. Whoever that's Loudon, tell them whoever they can call me. I'll be home by 2 o'clock, and I'll see if I can go further. But that's. I was rereading Souls of Black Folk with W.E.B. Du Bois, and the question is raised by a person to him, what does it feel like to be a problem? And he said he's never answered that question. Then he goes on to say that the issue for the 20th century, it will be the color line. Well, it's 21st century now, and it's still a color line. Mm. He says something else in that book, and that's this whole business that's why we need to talk. I live a double conscious life. As a black person, I got to be two people in one world. You only have to be one person in one world. So we got to talk about that because you're born white in a world that understands white. You don't have to do nothing about black. But I'm born black in a white world, and I got to be black in a white world, and I got to be double conscious. I can say a whole lot more about that. But it's tough living in a world where you got to be sometimes two people at one time and not lose your mind and not be called, not be labeled that will put you in some asylum. And I'm amazed that black people have managed to do it. Yeah. So I think whoever they tell them, if y'all will listen to me, I'll be home at 2. If I pass it loud, my home number has not changed. Okay.
Great. So racism has been called America's original sin. In fact, that's the title of a whole book. Others see love of power and money as being the real corruptions of the soul, and race is where these corruptions get played out. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I brought along, just in case that came up, Jim Wallace's book, America's Original Sin. Again, this stuff is layered. Racism can't exist without someone having power. Power. And I would not be too far removed equating power with also who owns the money, who controls the money. So I think that to maintain racism is so crucial to whoever is a racist. If you don't want to give up power, and you don't want everybody to have equal distribution of the resources, then yes, you will maintain racism. Again, I haven't defined that yet. I'm going to wait until we can get a chance to do that. But I think yes. And this is where, for me, this whole business of going to the polls and voting, and this is where my white friends have to hear black people. You can eat with me. You can have lunch with me. You can do the electric slide with me. You can do all the dances with me, but you go to the polls. And you don't stop to think that when you pull that lever for that person has an ideology that does everything it can to rob me of being human in America. And we got to deal with that. We got to deal with that. We got to deal with that.
Well, then we've had a few questions online that are related to each other. So I'm going to ask these questions kind of as a group here.
Okay.
So a lot of folks are wondering, what can we do? What can white Christians do? What can the church do to be an ally, to help bring in peace and justice? And then also, what advice do you have for a generation of young folks who are filled with anger and rage right now?
Elizabeth, I've been spending a lot of time because really a role I'm playing in our general church. Our governance committee is taking a look at the issue of covenant. And so I've been wrestling with the Shema. Hear, Israel, the Lord thy God is one. Love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. And Jesus, who knew the Shema, added from Leviticus, I think Leviticus 16:24, whichever. I've been working on this stuff for a while. Love thy neighbor as thyself. So here's what Bill Lee's been thinking. If we would do a test case, and we could get persons who are serious about spending about 6 months with the Shema, reflecting over those words. If those words lead to confession, then let's confess over those words. Those words lead from confession to repentance, then let's repent. But after repentance, let's have some action. Because otherwise, we've done a great academic exercise that led to nothing. But I think the Shema is a place, at least that's where I am. I have had to stay with the Shema all through this. I had to keep telling myself that God who made me made you. And we got to figure this out. We got to figure this out. And I think love is the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it. So why doesn't Roanoke, Virginia, the mayor can't do this. That's not the mayor's responsibility. The city manager can't do this, but the church can. I'm no longer pastor, so I have no power. I got no power. I got great suggestions, but no power. If just two churches, not just, let me stop trying to stop saying just, if two churches said we're going to partner, and for 6 months we're going to work at the Shema, which means you now have to raise these race issues and all of this, and hear me, white people, your white fragility sometimes is sickening. You cannot crumble every time somebody calls you a racist, every time. Listen, I never responded to someone calling me a nigger because I am not. I'm not. So if you're not a racist, then you don't have to bend. Stand up and say, that's not me. And then show it. Show it. But we need people to come together who are strong, who are willing to ask and deal with the hard questions, to be able to say, in one of those sessions, somebody's going to say, that's racist. You can't start crying and say, you called me a racist. You are a racist if you're going to keep doing that. I promised my wife I'm practicing not to get like this. Because I want you to hear me. I don't want you to say, boy, there's another man, black man. I really want you to hear me. I believe if across this nation, in every city, in every town, two congregations that are totally different in race, black and white, Hispanic, I don't care, and say, we're going to work at this Shema. We're going to, and the reason why I say 6 months, because I think that's a short time, but it's a long enough time to make sure that we get something done. So.
Well, what can we do here in Roanoke? What are organizations that need our time and our resources to be a part of a solution?
This is an interesting thing. I don't think organizations, I think there's one, that's the church or the synagogue or wherever people gather who are religious people. I've said this over and over again when people ask me that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour. I don't care whether people go to church all white and all black. That don't do none of that. We missing it. What I want is for my white friends to stand in pulpits and preach a gospel that transforms lives. Now, majority of people I know, if they are part of any other organization, they are already part of this one. So here it is. It's here. It's in the church. It's in the religious places. If we can do our jobs there, if we can confront each other here, we'll do it in our social clubs, we'll do it in our book clubs, but if the moral agency does not say anything that cause transformation to take place, then all we are on Sunday mornings and whatever we gather, just another club gathering. Jesus, you do know he cleansed the temple. You do know he didn't always have cute little mammy-pammy sayings. He did take a cord of whips and said, you made my father's house a den of thieves. That was Jesus. It's supposed to be a house of prayer. And the last time I heard my mama, my daddy, and my granddad, they said prayer changes things. And prayer changes people. If we turn these places into houses of prayer, it will filter out into the other places. The bank offices where executives go, if executives come here on Sunday morning and they're hearing gospel, they're going to be better people when they go back to their offices. That's Bill Lee.
Well, here's a final question.
Ooh, got one more?
That looks like it's from your son. So I have to ask. It's a great question. What advice do you have for leaders who want to provide a space for employees and congregations to discuss race?
Yeah. Aaron, this is your dad. And you know what the answer is going to be. This is something he and I talk about forever. The person who raised the question must be the person who's the catalyst for getting it done. So, son, go ahead and this is the risky piece because he works for the federal government. So you're going to have to be creative and say to your colleagues, this conversation has to be had. And you've got enough skill sets to make that happen. So not just my son, but I say to all of us out there, I would much rather risk and get it done than to sit on my hands wondering what could have been. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die without having tried.
Thank you.
I don't.
Bill, I think this is a historical moment. I don't think this is a passing moment, but this is a moment that will it's not the start of something. It's a galvanizing, clarifying moment that we'll all remember and will be answerable to in some way. I wanted to tell you that my reading about white fragility has been helpful to me. And my posture in all of this is that it's not time for me to be the one offering explanations. It's not time for me to be offering consoling words to others. It's time for me to listen. And I've heard, as you said, the thing I don't need to do, and not just about like the word racist, but other things, is to have an immediate knee-jerk reaction when the priority is for me to just resist that and say, what is it that's trying to be said? What do I need to hear? And then the second thing is, it's not up to me just to simply say I'm sorry. So we have one of those classic American moments where we all feel bad, and maybe you can put your arm around me while I cry. Because repentance and transformation means that we are in relationship and we have to stay in it, and we have to make mistakes, and we have to have some successes, and we have to work this out together over time. So I hope I've modeled that in this conversation, that it's a point where I may have a lot of opinions, but I'm not even interested in my opinions right now. I will be, of course, because it's not a matter of humiliation or anything. It's just a matter of Christian humility and Christian empathy. And I hope this conversation has served that, and I hope to continue to do that.
George, not just the conversations. I think the listening audience need to know this. So you called me last week. You've called me twice this week. I got a strange feeling you're going to call me sometime tonight. We got to do this. We got to do this. George has listened. He has listened. I know listening to some of us without anger might be tough. But how many black males must die before someone will listen? Let me say this. Can I say this quickly?
Sure.
When I entered Duke Divinity School in 1975, the fall of 75, I discovered, there were some discoveries, especially the racial issue. But in the curriculum at Duke, there was not a single course in black church that the entire student body had to take. I was president of the Black Seminary the following year, so I helped lead the argument with Dean Langford, bless his memory, that we felt the white students need to know the black church. How can you be church? Because the only thing you're learning was about yourself. So we eventually got Black Church in America as a core course at Duke Divinity School. So why did I raise that? If people would listen and find out how important it is, not just Bill Lee wanted to have a course for Black Church in America. No, I want you to be a more well-versed student so you can understand what it is. Because for me, C. Eric Lincoln in his book, Black Church in America, states it clearly, to understand black people, you've got to understand their religion. I think, George, you come as close to anyone that I have dealt with here, and you keep working at it.
Oh.
So I thank you.
You're kind. I need to do more, but you're kind.
Oh, you're going to do more because...
Along those lines, we have a member of the church, Dave Harrison, who's determined himself to do reading and to listen and to educate himself as much as possible. He's put together a resource list for himself to follow, and I just am making that available on this online presentation so that it's not an exhaustive list, it's only one person's gathering, but it models, I think, for somebody who's trying to get outside his own bubble to try to understand and to gather things that he might not agree with all of it, but he just needs to hear it. And so those resources are available. Bill has also made available to us a link to 10 documentaries. The title of the link is called 10 Documentaries to Watch About Race, instead of asking people of color to explain things to you.
And I need, since my son has gotten a plug, that came from my daughter. My children are now fixing it so that I behave myself and I'm looking intelligent when I come in events like this. So my daughter said, rather than try to answer every question, just give the folk the link. So Sarah is the reasoning for that. So there's Aaron and Sarah. Both of my children have been working today. Bless their hearts.
Yeah.
Make Daddy proud.
And we got that from you this morning, and Andrea Boone, our producer, has already worked that into the slides so that you can find the link on this presentation.
Thank you.
Bill, I want to thank you. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your caring about this church to be here. And your having been engaged with this church for years before even I came to be here. The constancy you bring is inspiring, but it's really needed too. And that's your point about the ongoing relationship. So I hope you don't take that for granted. I so much appreciate that.
George, you're welcome. So if I ever come here and don't say this, then I know I'm in bad shape. But again, these relationships. Mm-hmm. I met Judge Fitzpatrick, gosh, I don't know how many years ago. I was on a board, a committee with him doing something. And each time we would meet, he would say, Bill, you got to end this meeting because I got to get home because Ms. Fitzpatrick, Helen, had dinner ready. He ate at a certain time. And so I invented meeting Ms. Fitzpatrick and then all three sons. Mrs. Fitzpatrick made me a Fitzpatrick. She said, I now have 4 children. Now some folk will hear that and say, that's corny. That's not corny with me because I know where she's coming from with that. And so Bev brought us, and Eric, I feel that that's not just patronizing me. We have come to a place we've talked so much that people can start claiming that. I just think we got to keep working at that. And people have stories like mine because this has not always been my story.
Right.
Okay?
Well, boy, you know how to end a conversation at Second Presbyterian by evoking the name of Helen Fitzpatrick and Judge Fitzpatrick. If you don't mind, I'd like to end with a blessing that I use often at this church, adapted a little bit. It comes from my father, and just end our live stream with this blessing.
Okay.
That as we go from this place, that this blessing be ours. That we feel good about the good that we do or try to do. That we feel the sweet breath of forgiveness for the errors and mistakes we make, as long as we have it in our hearts to do better and are determined to do better. And may the kingdoms we build enhance the beauty and dignity and worth of every person, and so be an acceptable part of God's kingdom who rules over all. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.